I'm Aaron Porras, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, tensions on Israel's northern border continue to heat up towards a boiling point. World Heritage Organization UNESCO gets barred from Hebron, and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu shares some thoughts with the Jews of the diaspora. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. The heavy fighting in Quneitra, Syria continues to rage on, but now that it's spilled into Israel twice over the last 2 days, the Israeli Air Force has been striking Syrian targets in turn. The Israeli army has just confirmed that it hit Syrian army positions yesterday evening, the second time it's taken action in Syria in a day. This time, they destroyed a Syrian ammunition truck and 2 artillery guns on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. The IDF says that while it isn't involved in the internal fight in Syria, it views with severity any attempt to harm the sovereignty of Israel and considers the Syrian Assad regime responsible for what transpires in its territory. The Golan Regional Council has evacuated farms and orchards near Quneitra, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has a message for Iran.
צה"ל תקף אמש מטרות של צבא סוריה. זו הייתה תגובה תקיפה לירי של פצצות מרגמה לשטחנו. המדיניות שלנו ברורה, איננו מקבלים טפטוף מכל סוג שהוא. לא מרגמות, לא רקטות, לא זליגת ירי, מכל סוג שהוא, בכל חזית שהיא. אנחנו מגיבים בעוצמה על כל פגיעה בשטחנו או באזרחנו. מעבר לכך, אנחנו רואים בחומרה את הניסיונות של איראן להתבסס צבאית בסוריה, והניסיונות לצייר את חיזבאללה בנשק מתקדם דרך סוריה ולבנון.
Joining me now in the studio is former Deputy Foreign Minister and Israeli Ambassador to the United States, Dani Ayalon, to dive deeper into Israeli airstrikes in Syria. Dani, thank you so much for joining me again.
My pleasure, Aaron.
All right, so my first question is simple. In the last 2 days, Israel has carried out 2 airstrikes against Assad allied forces. So are these isolated incidents, or are we going to see a lot more of this in the coming future?
Well, so far it seems to be isolated incidents. And by the way, it's not the first time. Maybe now they're coming not so far between, few and far between. And it may increase as the Syrian army is trying to reestablish control over the Syrian Golan, close to the Israeli border. But Israel's policy has always been zero tolerance to any aggression from whatever side. And in this case, every firing on Israel is being responded in kind and in a way, even in a more powerful way, for deterrence purposes and to signal that this is not the way for them to go. If they want to try some dropping or some kind of an attrition war, Israel is not ready for that and will never be ready for that.
So that actually, you brought me into my next question, which is we have Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, who is making some very threatening comments in the last few days, saying, if a war began, fighters from all over, from Pakistan, Afghanistan, and all these places would come and join them, from Iran. Are we about to see a war here? And if so, how true are his words? How strongly should we take them?
Well, I doubt it. I think it's actually coming from a position of weakness. If he has to rely on foreign troops, all kinds of hodgepodge from Pakistan and who knows where, to come for the aid of Hezbollah, I don't think it shows that he is very much confident about his strength. It could happen. I don't think it's Hezbollah's interest. It's certainly not Israel's interest to have any kind of violence in our northern border. But things may escalate. Things may come out without even, because of miscalculations. But here, I think Israel's position here is also very, very firm and very clear. Unlike the Second Lebanon War 11 years ago, 2006, this time we will not keep one arm behind our back, meaning that we will not spare Lebanese infrastructure and we will go all out seeing the Lebanese government as responsible. And now that Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese government, right, we certainly have a case.
We take them all as one.
Yes, so it's going to be devastating for Lebanon. We may suffer too, but our, let's say, our rehabilitating pace is much faster than the Lebanese. So it's not going to be on par. Then this is why I think the Hezbollah is still very much deterred. This is why the Lebanese would not like to see the Hezbollah opening a front with Israel, as it is quite clear that Hezbollah is not fighting for Lebanon. It's fighting for Iran. It's an Iranian arm serving the interest of Iran, like working in Syria, and certainly not serving the interest of the people of Lebanon.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the relationships here and maybe go into how that works out. What is Hezbollah's relationship to the Lebanese government, if they're a part of that government, as opposed to their relationship in Syria and with Iran and with Russia, etc.?
So we should see Lebanon and the Hezbollah for what it is. And for all, not just for practical purposes, it is an organic part of the Iranian war machine. It is the proxy of Iran taking over Lebanon and helping the Iranian interest and forces in Syria to keep Assad, which is also a puppet of Iran. So, if we look at the bigger picture, what Iran is trying to do within its purposes of hegemony in the region is to create a corridor from Iran all the way to the Mediterranean, through Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. And for that, they need Hezbollah, they need the Syrian forces, and this is why now we see that the Syrian forces are trying to actually reach the Iraqi border to meet the Shiites, militias from Iraq side, so they can have a free pass. And this is why we see now maybe more intense firing, which are not maybe intent on our side of the border, as the Syrians are fighting the insurgents over there.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming in, Dani Ayalon, former ambassador. All right, now Sunday afternoon, the Israeli cabinet decided to freeze plans to build an egalitarian prayer section at the southern part of the Western Wall. The fallout has already been tremendous. Although Natan Sharansky's plan for a pluralistic site had been approved in 2016, pressure from the ultra-Orthodox parties and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition had prevented any movement towards construction. Now that the plan's been cancelled, Sharansky's Jewish agency has cancelled a scheduled dinner with the Prime Minister. Instead, the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency will change its entire agenda for its time in Jerusalem to address the ramifications of these decisions. Sharansky himself is sharply critical of the decision.
אתמול כמובן ראיתה אכזבה עמוקה ודאגה עמוקה, כי ההחלטות האלה לא רק שהן מבטלות שנים של התחייבויות, הבטחות וסיכומים בינינו כנציגים של העם היהודי וממשלת ישראל בנושא הכותל, לא רק שהם מחזירים אותנו עוד פעם שלישי כבר, לפי זיכרון שלי, לוויכוח מי הוא יהודי שמפלג בין חלקים גדולים של העם היהודי במדינת ישראל, אבל גם בזה יש סכנה ממש להחליש מאוד הקשר בין חלקים גדולים של העם היהודי במדינת ישראל.
The Jewish Agency says that the deplorable decision contradicts the vision and dream of Herzl, Ben-Gurion, and Jabotinsky, and the spirit of the Zionist movement. Many American Jewish organizations have released similar critical statements. In related news, Jerry Silverman, the CEO of the Jewish Federation of North America, is equally concerned with Sunday's conversion bill that gives the Israeli rabbinate complete control over conversions to Judaism in Israel. He says that these messages create more of a divide between Israel and diaspora Jewry. Anat Hoffman, the chairwoman of the Women of the Wall, is equally outraged.
This is so outrageous. For anyone who believes in social change, it means that even when you talk to the government and you sign an agreement, it means nothing. We're going to the Supreme Court. In fact, we went already months ago, and we will demand that the Supreme Court will force Netanyahu's hand to do what's right. And what's right is equality. You can't take the keys to the holiest site of the Jewish people and just give it to a zealot minority.
Now, the Palestinians have gone to UNESCO to push for the old city of Hebron, as well as 2 other cities in the West Bank, to be recognized as endangered World Heritage Sites of the State of Palestine. In response, Israel is banning a United Nations fact-finding team entry into Hebron. ILTV correspondent Max Kaiser is here with more. Max, what is Israel's interest in keeping Hebron here?
Well, first of all, Hebron, it's a very important site to the Jewish people, both religiously and historically. Of course, it's where King David ruled for 7 years. It was the first capital of Judah. And then the Cave of the Patriarchs, which is the real issue here, that's one of the most important sites in Judaism.
So what you haven't addressed, though, is, why did the Palestinians want it then?
Well, the Palestinians want Hebron because it's fairly deep in the West Bank, it's got a substantial Muslim majority, and then they have their own claims on the Cave of the Patriarchs. Much like the Temple Mount, they claim it's a Muslim site. Now, for Israel, this is a big political headache. Hebron is not near the major Jewish settlement blocks. It has a pretty small Jewish population, and I think over the years we've really seen a lot of ambiguity from Israel about what they want to do with this territory. But now that Nikki Haley and the U.S. are really pushing back in the UN, I think Israel sees this as a time to fight back when it comes to Hebron, at least in the UN. Let's check out my report.
Even after the International Council on Monuments and Sites came out against Palestinian claims that the ancient Cave of the Patriarchs religious site is endangered by Israel, UNESCO is taking the allegations seriously. They were going to send a fact-finding team to the ancient city, but Israel has declined to grant the UNESCO team entry visas into Israel, and it's calling their neutrality into question. In May, the UN's cultural branch passed a resolution denying Israeli legal or historical rights to Jerusalem. Israel's ambassador to the UNESCO is saying that it will fight against the religious and cultural war that he says the Palestinians are trying to force on them. Hebron is one of the most fiercely disputed places in the region. Critics say that Israeli presence in the city violates Palestinian rights, but Israeli residents point to the millennia of essentially continuous Jewish presence.
All we are doing here is asserting the rights of our people to live in this town. And why not? At the end of the day, Arabs and Jews are family, we're cousins, and there's absolutely no reason why we can't live together.
The investigation into Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's alleged quid pro quo agreements with the editor of an Israeli newspaper is escalating, as Jewish-American billionaire Sheldon Adelson is now slated to testify to police. Adelson and his wife Miriam are both being asked about ties between Israel Hayom daily newspaper and the Prime Minister. Their testimony is connected to the investigation of the so-called Case 2000. In it, it's suspected that Netanyahu made a deal with the Yediot Ahronot newspaper where he would sabotage Israel Hayom's circulation in exchange for more favorable coverage from Ynet. Corroborating the allegations, Israel's Channel 2 News is claiming that the Yediot editor has presented evidence showing that Netanyahu has great influence over Israel Hayom. The paper and Adelson himself are seen as close to the Prime Minister. Netanyahu has said that the allegations in this case will come to nothing. A labor dispute at a Jerusalem hospital has pushed the parents of numerous sick children to engage in a hunger strike, and now even the Prime Minister is getting involved. 6 doctors, including the director of Hadassah Ein Kerem's Hematological Department, have resigned from the hospital. It's all over what they're calling medically unacceptable decisions from management, i.e., when the higher-ups tried to transfer a child's bone marrow transplant expert to another department without consulting the director. The parents of sick children began setting up a protest tent in the Jerusalem park. They've called for the High Court of Justice to fire Hadassah Hospital's CEO and open a new child cancer department at the Shaarei Tzedek Medical Center. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that both he and the health minister have done all they can and is calling for a return to the status quo at the hospital.
אני מבקש להתייחס בכמה מילים למשבר בהדסה. הוא נמשך זמן רב מדי. נעשו ניסיונות, גם על ידי, באמצעות שר התרבות שפועל בעניין הזה, ושר הבריאות שפועל בעניין הזה ללא לאות, וגם על ידי אחרים, נשיא המדינה וגם אחרים, להגיע לפתרון המשבר. הניסיונות הללו לא צלחו. הוגשה עתירה לבג"ץ שהתכנס ביום רביעי, וכולם מחכים לדיון. אני מבקש מהצדדים לעשות מאמץ אחרון, והמאמץ הזה הוא פשוט להחזיר את המצב לקדמותו, ואז לתת תקופה של חצי שנה, אפילו שנה, לבחון את הדברים, להחזיר את המצב לקדמותו, כדי שהילדים היפים והמסכנים הללו, החולים, לא ימשיכו לסבול.
But according to the parents, they've completely lost their belief in the health system, and the authorities aren't telling the truth. It sounds like they have no plans to call off their hunger strike anytime soon. There was controversy at this year's Chicago Dyke Parade, but not for the reasons you might come up with. ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh joins me with more on the story. Emmanuel?
Yes. Okay. Well, like you said, this Saturday there was the annual Chicago Dyke March. 3 people were actually told to leave because they were holding a pride flag with the Star of David or Magen David on it, clearly symbolizing they were Jewish, and they were kicked out because apparently they were it was starting a trigger and it was offensive.
They were triggering people and were offensive with
Yes.
All right, well, let's look at your report and find out some more.
A member of the Jewish LGBTQ organization, Laurel Grauer, stated that she was told to leave the march due to the fact that her flag was a trigger that people found offensive. A Dyke March collective member was quoted saying that the flag with the Star of David on it, quote, made people feel unsafe. They continued on saying that the march was, quote, pro-Palestinian and anti-Zionist, according to a report from the Chicago-based LGBTQ newspaper, Windy City Times. While some may have had their own outrageous expectations for the event, according to the Chicago Dyke March's Twitter account, the event is a, quote, anti-racist, anti-violent, volunteer-led grassroots mobilization and celebration of Dyke queer, bisexual, and transgender resilience. Unfortunately, you apparently can't be pro-Israel and resilient against homophobia at the same time.
Our next guest, I'm pleased to introduce, is an artist who documents the human experience through pencil and pastel drawings. Much of her work captures daily life in Israel, from shopping in the open market to prayer and even partying in clubs. So we're in for a unique experience. Shula Ross, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
So, first of all, tell us about your series a little bit.
I'm an artist working with sculpture.
Sculpture?
Yes.
Okay, I was told pastel and pencil.
And paintings.
And painting.
In oil.
So sculpture and paintings in oil.
Painting.
So this series
As
kind
well.
of crosses a lot of different media.
Very different.
All right, and then what's kind of the connecting theme of this series? It's just people of daily life?
Critics call it naivism.
Naivism.
Yes. I'm not sure if it's really the exact word, because it's figurative, as you see in the picture. Most of the themes is daily life, and but in opposite to the naivism, there is a movement in it. There is expression, and a lot of things that you see, nostalgic themes from childhood, from albums.
So how did you come about developing this this series? You know, what inspired you to focus on what it is that you focused on?
It's come from within. It's not thinking. It just come from within.
Just intuition. You find that moment, you capture it.
Intuition. At first, I started with painting, and someday it wasn't enough, and I started to sculpture, 3-dimension. And the sculpture is casting in bronze or in aluminium.
So what media are you using? And you're casting in bronze and aluminium?
Bronze and aluminium.
And no other metals?
And sometimes different, like stone or something. But most of them is aluminium and sculpture, very heavy, not so big.
What's the scale? How big are we talking?
About
Big enough to sit on the
50
table?
centimeters.
50 centimeters?
Yes.
It's a nice size. You know, multiple
Yes.
pieces in the mold. This is a complicated process. It's amazing. So, you know, how long have you been making art? How long have you been producing?
I was painting when I was a little kid. But then I studied in the Hebron University, History of Art. And then I took courses in the evening while I was working in the Ministry of Education. And at last, I retired from the job in the Ministry of Education. It was management. And started full-time job to paint and sculpt.
Yeah, I'm looking at these pieces and I love it because I recognize so many of these places. I feel kind of attached to that right immediately kind of as you see it.
Many people feel attached to it.
So when can we see the show? When is it being exhibited?
Now there is a show in a shopping center in Tel Aviv, near the municipality.
Okay.
Shopping center, it calls Gan Ha'ir.
Okay.
And the down store, near the fountain, there is a gallery named Space.
Beautiful.
And there is some pictures and some sculpture of me. Next month, there will be sculpture outside. When the people walk outside,
Where?
Biggest.
And that'll also be in Gan Ha'ir.
The same shopping center, Gan Ha'ir. And in August, we are going with the team. We have a national team of artists. We are part of an international organization, and we meet once a year. This year it will be in Croatia.
Okay. In Croatia?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So that's, wow, so you're traveling all over the place with this artwork, and that's an amazing thing.
Yes, sometimes I like to represent Israel.
Well, I'm glad that you are, because your work is beautiful, and thank you so much for coming in today and sharing it with us.
All right. Thank you.
All right, now it's the time of the year when the streets of Jerusalem are full of Jewish American college students on birthright trips to Israel, and the Israeli Prime Minister has a message for them. At the mega event in Rishon LeZion last night, Netanyahu told thousands of young diaspora Jews that they're joining Israeli soldiers in helping secure Israel's future. He implored them to tell others about the miracle of Israel.
This is the real Israel, and you should tell everyone about it. Everyone. And you should do so proudly. And when they attack, stand very proud and say, who are you with? The free people of Israel who defend the religious rights of all, or those who chop heads, those who show the greatest intolerance that we've seen since the Second World War? Choose. Are you with the free, or are you with the enslaved? If you're with the free, then you should stand proud with Israel and with the truth.
The CEO of Birthright International is saying that since 1999, around 600,000 Jews have gone to Israel on 10-day trips through the organization. He says that figure represents more than just a number, but a real change in the way world Jewry perceives Israel. Yesterday marked the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and the beginning of Eid. Eid is a festive time for Muslims worldwide, where they mark the end of the holy month of Ramadan with a feast. No one seemed happier for Eid, though, than the Israeli Arabs who marched through Yafo. And unlike traditional Eid parades throughout the Muslim world, this one features a marching band with Scottish bagpipes. The parade included dozens of young Muslim Israeli scouts marching through the streets, while onlookers cheered and shot confetti into the air. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu even got in on the well wishes.
בהזדמנות הזאת אני מבקש לברך את כל אזרחינו המוסלמים ואת המוסלמים באשר הם בחג עיד אל-פיטר שמח. כול העם ואנתום ח'יר. חג שמח. תודה רבה.
Enroll in eTeacher's online Hebrew courses and quickly discover that it creates the deepest connection to Israel that you could ever imagine. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. Recently, there have been a growing number of accounts of people trying to exclude others for all sorts of reasons, whether it's removing some Jewish participants at a march in Chicago or trying to remove the Dalai Lama from a commencement speech. Sometimes someone gets left out. So today's word is chutzmi, meaning aside from or excluding. You can use chutzme for less politically charged reasons too. For example, I can tell a waiter at a restaurant that I want everything on the burger chutz mi'agvaniot, or excluding tomatoes. By the way, if you know me, you know that that's totally true. Sorry, tomato lovers. Now, you've probably already guessed it, but chutzme is actually two words, with mi or me being a prefix meaning from, and chutz being outside or exterior. So you're quite literally saying that you want something outside. In the end, the most important point to today's word, though, is that chutzme is not chutz, your vocabulary, anymore. Let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be partly cloudy with a low of 74 or 23 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect an additional rise in temperatures to a hot and dry high of 87 or 31 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.54 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras, and thanks for watching.